Hello everyone, welcome to chapter 23, Conducting Intercoder Agreement. In today's lesson, we'll have 5 parts, starting from why the skill is important, and then what is the intercoder agreement, and then procedures and examples of intercoder agreement from informal to more systematic procedures. And the last one is summary. So let's get started. The skill of using intercoder agreement to have an additional coder check the accuracy and reliability of your interpretation. Why the skill is important? Intercoder agreement provides a means for checking the consistency between two or more researchers as they code a database. So it provides a reliability check in qualitative research. It also adds to the sophistication and rigor of qualitative database analysis because more than one individual's coding scheme is taken into consideration. So it serves as a cross-check of your coding because someone else is also coding the data and providing his or her interpretation. After all, qualitative data analysis is a highly interpretive process in which you identify appropriate text segments and assign codes that make sense to you. What is intercoder agreement? Intercoder agreement is when one or more additional coders analyze a qualitative database, provide codes for the database, and compare the results of coders for the amount of agreement on the codes. This procedure essentially provides a reliability check during qualitative data analysis and adds to the rigor of the interpretive process underway in analyzing a qualitative database. Two or more researchers are likely to have different interpretations of the same data and code somewhat differently. It's important then to monitor and discuss codes as part of the analysis processes. Cookart recommended tending to intercoder agreement whenever multiple coders are used. For those coming from a quantitative background or seeking to publish their qualitative studies in a field that has been largely quantitative, this reliability check adds credibility and rigor to the qualitative data analysis. Many computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software packages include reliability features whereby you can calculate agreement among different coders. Alternatively, there are procedures that qualitative inquirers have used to conduct intercoder agreement, and you can study their procedures and implement them in your own project. Procedures for conducting intercoder agreement. Step 1. You need to find one or more additional coders, individuals who understand qualitative research and coding, to participate in the intercoder agreement process. Many projects involve only one additional coder. Although John was invited in the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs project with 4 coders, Joanna found a fellow graduate student with training and experience in qualitative coding who agreed to be an additional coder with her dissertation. Step 2. Create a codebook of codes through an initial coding of the database. The basic idea of qualitative codebook is to have an agreed-upon set of codes to their definitions. Although there is no single way to develop a codebook, we like the codebook organization scheme advanced by Guest, Bunce, and Johnson. An example of their organization using hypothetical data is shown in Table 23.1. This codebook contains the name of the code, a brief definition, and a more extended definition, instances that should and shouldn't categorized within the code, and one or more sample quotations to illustrate the type of evidence that would be identified for the code. Often, this code book is created by one person and then revised as the process proceeds. The code book is not a fixed document, but it's continually reviewed and clarified for all of the coders. Step 3. Choose a method for conducting intercoder agreement. Approaches run from an informal process of comparing codes for a percentage agreement to a more systematic procedure that involves several steps and uses statistics. Selecting such method to use a more informal process or a more formal procedure depends on the norms for your discipline. It might also be decided with eventual publication in mind. For example, to the journalists you intent to target describe a process or a specific coefficient of agreement. Later, we provide 4 examples of procedures used, including the one John used in the Department of Veterans Affairs project. Here you also can see table 23.1 as we mentioned it before. Step 4. Conduct the intercoder agreement using a procedure found in the examples that follow or some combinations of procedures. Step 5. The final step in the process is to determine if agreement exists. An informal procedure can be used to determine if there is agreement. Miles, Huberman, and Saldana recommended striving for 85% to 90% intercoder agreement. Researchers might consider a procedural approach to discuss and resolve coding questions and differences that arise. Some refer to this as a consensual coding process. It doesn't necessarily mean calculating coefficients. Alternatively, you can use a more rigorous procedure and calculate the coefficient of reliability, the kappa statistic. Cohen's kappa coefficient is a way to statistically measure the agreement between two individuals. It requires two binary variables, say individual A and individual B, and whether they agree or disagree on the code for a particular text segment. A formula exists to determine their degree or agreement minus what could be expected due to chance, resulting in a coefficient that ranges from +1 to -1. Good agreement tends to be a coefficient 0.60 to 0.80, and a very good agreement from 0.80 to 1. Perfect agreement. This coefficient is often calculated in the health science literature. Examples of intercoder agreement from informal to more systematic procedures. Here's an example of interrated agreement based on negotiating differences. Hopper and Clippard studied vaccine decision narratives about human papillomavirus obtained from college women and health clinicians. Interrated agreement followed an informal process as follows. Step 1. A second coder was trained to read all the 38 transcripts and provide an initial response. Step 2. The two coders met to discuss and negotiate the interpretation of the emerging themes. In the process, the second coder was instructed to verify the data interpretation rang true from a college woman's point of view. Step 3. Both researchers coded the transcripts using a priori domains. The coders met to ensure assistant interpretation of the coding criteria. Step 4. Data were interpreted for whether the participants' narratives reflected acceptance or resistance. Step 5. Coder discrepancies on two transcripts were discussed and resolved. Step 6. Final coder agreement of decision narratives of vaccine acceptance and resistance resulted in a Cohen's kappa coefficient of 92. In this example, we see intercoder agreement using a detailed codebook. Intercoder agreement procedures were used in a study by Guest et al., examining perceptions of social desirability, bias, and accuracy of self-reported behavior in the context of reproductive health surge in the West Africa and Ghana. The next example illustrates intercoder agreement procedures using mutually coded text segments. We conducted intercoder agreement with 4 coders in a project at the Veteran Affairs Healthcare System in Ann Arbor, Michigan. This project related to the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act and how patients viewed the act as they sought health care from Veteran Affairs hospitals. The final example illustrates intercoder agreement procedures using 2 different methods. Intercoder agreement was used in a study about tuberculosis among newly arrived Vietnamese refugees in 2 counties in New York State. In this study, 2 methods for calculating intercoder agreement were used. The first required that the coders use the same words and code the text passages the same way. This required some discussions on the coder's part. The second method had more give. The coders weren't asked to code the same passage using the same code word, but simply whether the belief was present or absent. This second approach was less stringent and would probably be easier to administer. Both approaches relied on coders viewing an a priori codebook for code names and their definitions. The following steps were used. To sum up the chapter, intercoder agreement provides a means for checking the consistency between two or more researchers as they code a qualitative database. The procedure calls for researchers to independently code a database and then compare their coding results. It's essentially a qualitative reliability check for consistency. It's a practical, often recommended, and a commonly used procedure in the health sciences. The degree of agreement can be hand calculated, or it can be derived using qualitative computer software programs. The overall procedure involves engaging multiple coders, creating a codebook of codes, choosing a method for calculating intercoder agreement, using established procedures, and then determining and reporting on the extent to which agreement exists among the coders. Several procedures are available in the literature that range from informal to formal approaches. They differ in the extent of discussion and the negotiation of the codes, the centrality of the code book in the process, the basis for agreement, and the report of the agreement on the basis of percentages or the kappa statistic. Thank you for watching till the end. See you in the next video.